This illustration symbolizes how I was seen by other people and how I understood myself before being diagnosed with schizophrenia. And you'll notice that the first thing that strikes you about the illustration is there's wholeness and an integrity to the flower. At the center of the flower is my name, Pat, and that's how I knew myself. That's what everybody called me. And just like you, there were many aspects of who I was as an individual. There was my culture, my family, my friends, my sexuality, my work history, my politics, my class background, my spirituality, etc. So I was a multidimensional, multifaceted person as I am today. And also importantly, you'll notice on the flower that there's an empty petal at the top. Now this empty petal is very important because it symbolizes the idea that our lives, as we stand in the present, open onto a future. And that future is, very importantly, ambiguous and uncertain. Martin Heidegger, the great philosopher, once said that to be human means to be a question in search of an answer. And I always enjoyed this definition of being human, because it means that life is a quest, life is a journey, life is an unfolding question in search of answering. And that what it means in some very essential way to be human means that we're always projected and up to something, always questioning, not just in adolescence, but in adulthood, and even hopefully into old age, always asking, who am I, what am I up to, and who will I be today? And the reason I'm stressing this idea of the open petal on the flower is because it's precisely in this area where life opens onto a future which is ambiguous and uncertain, that a very great wounding occurs. And this wounding has nothing to do with any disorder or distress that brings us into mental health services. Rather, this is a wounding, a deep wounding to the heart and of humanity itself that occurs because of the way most of us who are diagnosed with mental illnesses are treated once we enter into the system. To give you a sense of who I was, just prior to being diagnosed, I enjoyed athletics. I was a terrible student. I did everything I could to avoid paperwork or reading or writing, but I loved basketball and baseball and all manner of sports. And my dream as a teenager was to become a coach for a women's athletic team. And as I stood at the age of 17 years old looking out onto my future, that was my aspiration, that was my hope. Within a fairly short period of time, I was taken to a mental institution and diagnosed with schizophrenia. And once I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, everything began to change in terms of how others viewed me. Once diagnosed with schizophrenia, the disorder took on a master status in terms of my identity. Notice that my name, Pat, is no longer at the center of the flower. You'll notice there are some squiggly lines on the illustration. And those squiggly lines represent the idea that it was as if professionals and then later my family and friends began to look at me through a lens that distorted who I was, the lens of psychopathology, the lens in which all of my behavior was interpreted as part of disorder. Let me give you an example. Growing up as a kid, I was always a very active child. I grew up in a big Irish Catholic working class family, and my idea of hell was a rainy day when everyone was crammed into a very little house together and we didn't get to go out and run. And my grandmother, a little Irish grandmother, she would say, "Oh, Patricia, go on out and blow the stink off you." And so I knew myself as an active child, an active person, who now and again had to go out and blow the stink off her. And needless to say, once in a mental institution and diagnosed with schizophrenia, the nursing staff were not writing in their chart, the girl has the jig, she has ants in her pants, and the treatment is to go blow the stink off her. This is not what they were saying about me in my clinical notes. Instead, they were saying the very same characteristic, the very same person, but now, oh, she's agitated. Okay. Another example, I tend to be a quiet, contemplative sort of person who feels terribly comfortable speaking to a large audience, but one-on-one in a social situation, I tend to be shy and really to prefer to be in nature and to be alone. This is a lovely quality of who I am. And yet, the same quality, once in a mental institution diagnosed with schizophrenia, being viewed through the lens of psychopathology, I wasn't a lovely, quiet, contemplative thinker anymore. I was aloof, guarded, suspicious. Huh? See my point? No matter what I did, too active, not active enough, too happy, not happy enough, too sad, not sad enough, too active. It just went on and on. No matter what you did, you feel as if you're in a glass box, which on one level is invisible, yet is very tangible. You feel trapped. And even to begin to protest this entrapment, wait, your interpretation of me is not me. What do the professionals say? Oh, you lack insight into the fact that you're ill. See, even further proof. Oh, you're getting angry now. Further evidence of the illness, so that you really do feel captured in the gaze, and eventually a process of colonization occurs where we actually begin to believe these things about ourselves, this interpretation of ourselves. We begin to internalize it. We become colonized by a psychiatric view of ourselves, and that can lead to even further trouble. So some of this bias, or this tendency to see disease rather than human being, is really something that is trained. I have some very fascinating studies in the history of psychology, and I've gone into abandoned institutions, mental institutions in the United States, and found old clinical records. And I found a particularly fascinating one of nursing students who were young and coming into the field for the first time. And they had to keep a journal where they, from memory, recounted their conversation with patients. This would have been back in the 1960s. When I found these journals in the 90s, but they were quite ancient and laying on the floor. And the nursing students, because they were new to the field, would write very simple things like, I met Judy today. She's a 60-year-old woman. She reminds me a lot of my grandmother. She likes to laugh and talk about her children. Sometimes she's very sad because her husband beats her. And they would write these about the conversations they had with these patients in the state hospital. But then, in red ink over the top of the students' handwriting were the notes from their nursing supervisors. Cross that out. She's not like your grandmother. She's a mental patient. Cross this out. She is not an interesting and humorous person. She is having ideas of grandeur and flight of ideas, and that's not laughter, that's hypomania. And so what I began to see through this editing process, the mentoring of a nurse to her student, was her taking the fundamental humanity of the nursing student and putting it through a prism or a lens, which began to distort the human being she was encountering and turning it into an illness. And it's been a very educational study, because I got to see right there in pen and ink how some of that transformation in the education of professionals takes place, how they are taught to study, to measure, to objectify human experience, to make it other. And I think and then they become very good at looking at people through that prism or the lens of illness, thereby forgetting the strengths and the resilience that we as full human beings bring to what are sometimes very difficult life events.